President Joe Biden pardoned 6 convicted of murder, drug, and alcohol crimes. U.S. Virgin Islands President, because he's in the U.S. Virgin Islands and he's over there visiting in Kings Hill, and he has pardoned 6 people who have served out sentences as convictions on a murder charge and drug and alcohol-related crimes, including an 80-year-old woman convicted of killing her abusive husband about a half-century ago, and a man who pleaded guilty to using a telephone for a cocaine transaction in the 1970s. The pardons, announced Friday, mean the criminal record of the crimes is now purged. They come a few months after the Democratic president pardoned thousands of people convicted of simple possession of marijuana under federal law. He also pardoned 3 people earlier this year and has commuted the sentences of 75 others. Biden's stance on low-level crimes, particularly low-level drug possession, and how those crimes can impact families and communities for decades to come, has evolved over his 50 years in public service. In the 1990s, he supported crime legislation that increased arrest and incarceration rates for drug crimes, particularly for Black and Latino people. Biden has said people are right to question his stance on the bill, but he also has encouraged them to look at what he's doing now on crime. The pardons were announced while the president was spending time with his family on St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The White House said those partner people went on to serve their communities. It said the pardons reflect Biden's view people deserved a second chance. Beverly Ann Ebon Tomas, 80, of Columbus, Ohio. At age 33, she was convicted of killing her husband. She testified that her husband beat her, verbally abused her, and threatened her. She told jurors that she shot him moments after he had assaulted her while she was pregnant. The judge refused to allow expert testimony on battered woman syndrome, and which is a psychological condition that can develop among victims of domestic violence. Now, she got 1 to 5 years of incarceration with credit for time served. Her appeal was among the first by someone with battered woman syndrome, and her case has been studied for academics. And I just want to stop right there because back in my junior days in college, I wrote a paper on the battered women syndrome, and I interviewed someone that had went through battered woman syndrome, who actually was diagnosed as battered woman syndrome, and she was actually receiving counseling and therapy during the time that I interviewed her. And she had some very interesting things to say about what the therapist told her. The therapist told her that she should stay within that relationship and just take some time to stay in a hotel for a few days and go back home. So I think things are very different now when it comes to battered woman syndrome. It is a diagnosis, and it does affect many women that have been abused by their abuser, especially in relationships, whether you're married or not, in long-term relationships where you actually live in the same household, and women deal with that, and they tend to go back and stay, and they resonate with their abuser and things like that. And so I think it's important, to recognize that in the judicial system, because it does happen. And back then, a lot, they didn't recognize that. And when they didn't recognize it, they incarcerated the woman for retaliating and including up to what you see here, murder, when it came to a woman defending herself, when it came to being in abusive relationships because of this diagnosis that wasn't really a diagnosis until it became one. And so it is being recognized. So I just want to stop, and share that. Now, as we go on, Charles Burns Jackson, 77, of Swansea, South Carolina. Burns Jackson pleaded guilty to possession and sale of spirits without tax stamps when he was 18, and it involved a single illegal whiskey transaction. He tried to enlist in the Marines but was rejected because of the conviction. Now, John Dix Knock III, 72, of St. Augustine, Florida, pleaded guilty to using his property as a grow house for marijuana 27 years ago. And let me stop right there. And now, marijuana, cannabis, is legal at the state level in states, but not at the federal level per se, but at the state level. So, can you imagine growing marijuana 27 years ago and then fast forwarding to today, and we see how things have changed? And just out in the public sector, being out in the community, riding public transportation, going to public places like parks, or just walking down the sidewalk, or going into a store and people are hanging out around the store, wherever you may be, you can consistently smell marijuana on people. And you see cannabis stores all over the place now in lots of different communities, cannabis. And even they're setting up cannabis in certain uh, residential areas. And that can be a problem, especially in the low income, less affluent areas. And I find that to be a problem as well, because a lot of times in the less affluent areas, people are already struggling and suffering and trying to, take care of their families, going to work and providing, and the struggle is real. And then they pop up, a cannabis store. And that was one of the things that I worked with another community on, advocating with that community to keep a cannabis store from being placed in a certain community uh, outside of the city that I resided in. But anyway, um, we know a lot of people use cannabis, so I'm not here to get in a back and forth on who uses cannabis and who doesn't, But anyway, he didn't cultivate the plants, but he got 6 months of community confinement, and he now operates a general contracting business. And then gave Parks Davis, 66, of Yuma, Arizona. When Davis was 22, he admitted using a telephone for a cocaine transaction. He served a 6-month sentence on nights and weekends in a county jail and completed probation in 1981. After the offense, the White House says Davis earned a college degree and worked steadily, including owning a landscape business and managing construction projects. He has volunteered as his children's high school and in his community. And then there is Edward Lincoln D. Corto, the third, 50, of Dublin, California. D. Corto pleaded guilty at age 23 to being involved in a marijuana trafficking conspiracy. He was released from prison in December 2000 after serving nearly 2 years. Before the offense, D. Corto had served honorably in the U.S. Army and the Army Reserves and had received numerous awards. And there's Vicente Ray Flores, 37, of Winters, California. As a 19-year-old, Flores consumed ecstasy and alcohol while serving in the Air Force, later pleading guilty at a special court-martial. He was sentenced to 4 months of confinement, loss of $2,800 in pay, and a reduction in rank. Flores participated in a 6-month rehab program that gives select enlisted offenders a chance to return to duty after therapy and education. His reduction in rank was amended, and he remains on active duty, earning medals and other awards for his service. Now, President Biden, he talks about giving second chances, and he says that people deserve second chances. And so leave your respectful comments below. And don't forget to share the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you're not a subscriber, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all to my new subscribers, and thank you if you anyone who has stopped by my channel. Thank you very much. God bless you all.